Demonized and suppressed by the war on drugs, psychedelic medicines are making their return, and we're here to bring you the latest in scientific research and therapeutic practices involving psychedelic medicines from psilocybin to ayahuasca to DMT and beyond. This is the Psychedelic Medicine Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the next episode of the Psychedelic Medicine Podcast. I'm Dr. Lynn Marie Morsky, your guide on this journey, and today we are going to be talking about the intersection of psychedelic medicines and attachment styles with Aaron Cherniak. Now, Aaron is a clinical psychologist and researcher examining a variety of topics in psychedelic science, including subjective experiences, outcomes, and mechanisms. Also a rabbi and the director of the J-Psych Lab of Jewish Spirituality and Mental Health, Aaron studies how psychedelic experiences are integrated into people's narratives of lifelong religious and spiritual development and contribute to culturally competent therapeutic models. This one is for those of you out there who have maybe read the book Attached or who know about different attachment styles and attachment theory. And we're going to have an interesting conversation about what's still very theoretical at this point, but may give you some points to think about as you're going along, perhaps doing psychedelic journeys or experimenting with diving into your own attachment styles. Now, before we get started, just a reminder that the Psychedelic Medicine Podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. Nothing here is to be construed as medical or legal advice. And as always, you'd think if I said it so many times, I wouldn't choke myself over it. As always, if you are a clinician and you would like to learn more about psychedelic medicines and how to discuss them with your patients or what the indications may be, etc., please visit the Psychedelic Medicine Association. It is our mission to educate frontline healthcare workers, anybody who sees a patient, doctors, nurses, nurse practitioners, therapists, etc., on psychedelic medicine so you feel comfortable having conversations about them with your patients when appropriate. You can find us at the psychedelicmedicineassociation.org. Now, without further ado, thanks so much for joining us today, Aaron.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Aaron is coming to us all the way from outside of Tel Aviv, so this is very exciting. And as mentioned in the intro, Aaron is also a rabbi, and so he may be throwing in some rabbinical knowledge and thoughts here and there, which I love. So, Aaron, if we can start we're going to talk about this paper that is about to be released. You were kind enough to share a preprint with me, and then we will share it with everybody listening. But the paper covers a lot of different things, but the thing that jumped out to me most was how psychedelics can impact attachment theory and how one's attachment or not in attachment theory can impact attachment styles, and how attachment styles may also impact psychedelic journeys and the efficacy of psychedelic therapy. So if you could talk a little bit about, like, tell us the name of the paper and some of what got you guys into researching it and what you looked at specifically.
Sure. So the paper is entitled "Psychedelic Science of Spirituality: an attachment to informed agenda proposal," and the idea came from the recognition of how influential attachment theory has been in clinical practice in psychotherapy generally. Um, and in searching for models that could be useful in psychedelic assisted therapy, stands to be a good candidate. Not that it would be a grand unifying theory that would make any other models obsolete, but that it would be an instructive, useful framework for clinical practice and research. Yeah.
And how did you go about setting up your evaluation and your dive into this topic?
Sorry, you got cut off.
Oh, I said,
How did I?
how did you all begin the investigation into this topic?
Sure. Well, maybe if, with your permission, I'll take a step back in terms of my
Yes.
own journey to psychedelics. Um, so I, in my undergraduate work, pursued a line of research about religious beliefs generally, and religious practices and mental health. And then in my graduate work, in my master's, pursued a line of work in therapeutic processes and interpersonal relationships within psychotherapy as as an important facilitator of therapeutic gains in the lens of attachment theory. And so my doctoral work is basically seeks to expand uh, on clinical applications of attachment theory within psychedelic science. That would be one way of looking at it. And, hopefully another realm of this, another area of this topic we can get into is that attachment theory has provided a very fruitful model uh, of lifelong, personality development generally, and specifically religion and spirituality. I mean, maybe we should define our terms for a second. When we think about attachment theory, originated as a theory of uh, parent infant dyads and how children develop in the context of those early caregiving environments and formative relationships, and how then their later development um, is related to the types of caregiving they receive early on. And attachment theory, in the following years, became expanded. One of the influential theorists talked about from the cradle to the grave, that attachment theory is relevant to uh, all aspects of human experience, the way that we handle novel environments and challenges, and negotiating um, you know closeness and vulnerability and personal boundaries in the context of relationships, and how so when we talk about attachment, I think attachment styles is probably the more popular term used in among wider audiences. We're talking about organized ways that people handle relationships and stressful situations in relationships as a function of um, a fundamental sense of security in the world. The world, can be a challenging place, um, and hopefully, from the way that we interact with our parents, or friends or mentors, or in romantic relationships, we internalize a fundamental sense that the world is safe, even with bumps along the way, and that I am, competent and capable of handling challenging situations, and that I am worthwhile, worthy of people's love and support, and that other people are capable and interested in providing it to me. Um, and so, one of the prominent themes in psychedelic science has been connectedness and you know vulnerability, and I mean, it just sort of, it felt like the chapter wrote itself, um, stemming from those ideas. Yeah.
Well, thank you for covering what attachment theory is. Yes, take a beverage, take a drink.
Yeah. Thank you.
There's a lot to cover.
Cheers.
Go for it. Have some tea while while I
Working up a
summarize.
sweat over here. Yeah.
Aaron, you're fun. Because I think a lot of us, I mean, I think there's a book called Attached, maybe. I have not read it, but I think 50 people have told me to read it. And it talked about kind of in, maybe more basic terms than, let's say, the academician on your end might cover it in, but I think it talked about something like secure attachment versus anxious attachment versus avoidant attachment. Are those some of the attachment styles, some of the basics, in case people have heard those terms?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. There's decades of research that support, you know, um, basically the notion that, um, you know, attachment anxiety or anxious attachment might develop uh, if people, don't have the confidence that that a problem will be resolved, or that they will survive a certain challenge, and um, that they're on their own with it, and whereas um, you know, and it will express itself in sort of hyperactivated, you know, um, hypersensitivity to situational distress, um, and um, whereas avoidant attachment, would still, sit on top of that basic sense of anxiety. That's why sort of attachment anxiety and avoidance are both under the umbrella term of attachment insecurities, because they're different expressions um of uh, lacking this sense of security. And avoidance would basically develops in circumstances where um, individuals, consciously or non-consciously, try to suppress um, suppress their feelings of uh, uh, insecurity, of discomfort, of pain, and try to function, to soldier on, as it were. Um, an easy way to think about it is sort of soldiering on would be the avoidance style, whereas anxiety would sort of be like the attention seeking, calling for help. That's an oversimplified way, but those are that's a basic way of thinking about it. Yeah.
Thank you for that clarification. And so, with that basic knowledge that we go into this, what were some of the thoughts that you all had going into this research as to how psychedelics and attachment styles might interact?
Sure. So, um, I think one of the most perplexing questions that psychedelic science is dealing with is how to predict who will have what kind of experience, right? And how to support people to have better experiences. Um, and we've seen in the literature, and people have talked about, letting go or surrendering, um, the sort of accepting the effects of the drug, of the substances, excuse me, of the compounds. Um,
They're drugs.
you know,
It's okay.
different,
We're
different, right, drugs,
destigmatizing drugs.
different
Yes.
different audiences, prefer different. So, um, so these attachment styles have sweeping implications for how people regulate their emotions. The cognitive styles that um, drive them to interpret situations in different ways, um, and you know, um, and um, the degree to which they can tolerate distress. Um, so when we think about what might predict a person's ability to, roll with the effects of a psychedelic substance, um, the fundamental sense of being able to, breathe through it, hold on to a hope that everything will be okay. Um, you know, um, I mean, attachment is very useful, in thinking along those lines. Um, and so, um, you know, especially, one of, again, one, another fun, another, it's super important that clinical trials of psychedelics can show changes in depression or anxiety. Attachment security is something that studies show is stable over a person's life, somewhat stable, right? Attachment security might change if, for example, a person enters an abusive relationship or has a or goes to therapy, um, or gets a pet, and through owning a pet is able to feel a lot more calm. And if a psychedelic session can change something that normally is stable over 35 years, that would be a very impressive
Yeah,
finding. Yeah.
absolutely. So, knowing that that's something that you wanted to investigate, how is what kinds of things, when you looked at this intersection, were you able to evaluate? Like, did you look at past papers to see if there was anything that showed there, or like how did you undergo this examination?
Well, we have a number of projects that are still ongoing. This article, is theoretical. Um, uh, but we basically applied the same model of attachment theory's utility in psychotherapy to this context, where attachment will, would or may predict the way that people react to the onset of psychedelics effects. Their ability to breathe deep and to be resilient, or I don't know if resilient is the right word, but to non-judgmentally accept their experience, um, you know, um, as a predictor of types of experiences. Also, as an outcome, as I was alluding to just now about, if attachment security could change, could be improved over the course of psychedelic therapy, and as well as a moderate, as a excuse me, as a mechanism, as a process. If we're trying to understand, we shouldn't, if we shouldn't just know that a therapy works by changing something. We should understand how it works, so that hopefully, we can structure it in such a way to, enhance those outcomes, and not just, push a button on a, and hope the magic black box, does the work. Especially when um, we know that uh, the context that uh, the context of psychedelic use has such an impact on the experience that people have. We have a responsibility to um, probe what factors can explain the change in therapy. And I think this also goes into the importance of integration, where the dosing session of psychedelics is only some of is only some. We know that even negative experiences with psychedelics can be uh, can be processed in such a in a supportive uh, uh, in this supportive therapeutic environment that's also subject to those same attachment processes. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. Like, assuming that somebody has an insecure attachment in one direction or the other, you know, what impact does that have on their ability to have a successful relationship with an integration therapist or even with the person perhaps facilitating the ceremony?
That's such an insightful question. It's sort of, I heard actually I heard the phrase the first time yesterday, the Matthew effect, where sort of the people who need the people who need the therapeutic effect of psychedelics the most may be coming to the therapy with at a disadvantage, right? If someone has attachment insecurity, they so in attachment research we talk about cycles, where the more secure a person is feeling, the more that they can develop security and engage in security enhancing processes. Um, and so um, we one of the eventual goals of our research program, my team and I, um, is to explore how to um, help people in advance of the dosing session to preempt sort of the avoidance strategies that would uh, handicap isn't the right word, but that might sabotage, not sabotage, that might
Yeah. Well,
get in the way of, that
yes.
might maybe sabotage, I don't know, might get in the way of their ability to um, to leverage the power of psychedelic therapy. I mean, but the same is true. You're so right about psychotherapy generally, right? Um, we know that a very important part of therapy is developing a therapeutic alliance, a working alliance with the therapist, a sort of covenant that that the therapist and the client agree on the basic goal of the therapy and the tasks of the therapy, and have um, uh, a an emotional bond or trust, bond of trust. There's a sort of interesting. We had this discussion amongst our team about, how much time in therapy does it take for an attachment relationship to develop, and people talk about the psychedelic substance in attachment terms, right? It wouldn't it wouldn't people talk about the grandmother, or the plant healer sort of an attachment figure. Attachment figure is a stronger, wiser other, to whom we seek proximity for, the closeness to help us overcome challenges, right? So when people are going through a psychedelic session, um, it's true that the role of the therapist is crucial, um, but it also appears to be that people experience the substance itself as providing comfort and guidance and teachings, you know, not to mention the sort of spiritual experiences that people can have, uh, uh, more distant from the substance, but, encountering, a deceased relative or a spiritual entity, um, that could provide an attachment type experience. We call them corrective experiences, where they can sort of compensate for the security that I lacked beforehand. Yeah. And I think this is an important point as well, that um, when we think about the types of supernatural, beings that people believe in generally and encounter in psychedelic sessions. Um, Attachment theory is useful in talking about um, um, people's different ways of experiencing. We'll use the sort of monotheistic Abrahamic God for a moment. You know, um, Even though there are traditional beliefs about God, and there's texts that would you know define God or characterize God as, for example, compassionate and forgiving and all loving and all those things. But we might have differences between, people may have internalized along the way, a punitive, image of God, or a vengeful representation of God, or a new uh, no, uh, the word that means not caring, the
Apathetic?
apathetic, apathetic, yeah, apathetic, representation of God. And so, um, people, there's some research about emotional breakthroughs, and I think attachment theory we're proposing that attachment theory can help us understand the um, the phenomena of the spiritual experience that often accompanies the clinical outcomes that we're seeing.
Yeah, because as I understand,
Yeah,
and that was an interesting part of the paper for me, was that you said, because I think the research has been done that i- it's not uncommon for, say, atheists to become less atheistic after certain psychedelic experiences with more of a mystical component. And so in your paper, you described how, and clarify if you can, because I'm probably getting this a little muddled, but your attachment to your idea of God, or your attachment to, like you said, what kind of God it is, or even your attachment to there not being one, um, how that attachment can affect whether, post experience you have an altered view.
sure. So I mean, this is. I'll take a step back for a second, because this is a hot topic amongst attachment researchers generally now, is that, on the one hand, attachment theory has these very useful experience near terms, right? Like when you say security, you know what that means. When you say attachment, you know what that means. But in our work, there is a technical meaning. So, we think, when we hear attachment, we think of a relationship, but attachment is, uh, in our work, refers to an organized set how um, of how you interact in relationships. It's not referring to the relationship itself. And so, um, you you can exhibit attachment vis-a-vis, the Abrahamic God, but you can also exhibit attachment towards, the universe with a capital U, and humanity with a capital H. And so it's relevant to, it's even though most of the research on attachment and spirituality has been done in those monotheistic contexts. It's not irrelevant to um, the feelings of universal connectedness and you know uh, the terms that are more popular in psychedelic science. Um, but yeah, I'm sorry, you'd asked an additional question that I've since forgotten.
Oh, I mean, I think you partially answered it at least, which is like, how is the person's attachment style to their idea of a god or of a lack thereof? Does that tend to, can that predict whether or not they end up after the experience changing their thoughts about that? Like if they were extremely securely attached to an idea of no god and then they come out, are does that make them less likely to adapt to a more agnostic version than somebody who was kind of insecurely attached to their version?
Sure. But before I continue with the second part of the answer, I wanna note that even though I am a rabbi, I'm primarily in this as a clinical psychologist and a research psychologist, and I'm not. It's not my. Uh, I think we need to be very careful in psychedelic science and in all of medical therapeutic practice, not to impose our, framework or ideology upon patients or you know. Uh, the work that we're, or this, even the science that we're doing. Um, not to mention other, ethical violations in psychedelic therapy that is beyond the scope of this. But you know, I'm not. Um, right, you referenced the paper showing that fewer people identified as atheists. Um, I'm not honestly. Oh, alert, lost connection.
No, you're still
Can you hear
here.
me okay? Is my I'm
Yeah,
coming.
you're good.
Okay. So you know, I'm not sure how to answer this question because just because a person's an atheist doesn't mean that they have attachment to security, right? Like like they can have a
Oh, no, no, no,
positive
that's absolutely not what I said. What I was
right.
saying is how securely
Okay,
they're
I'm sorry.
attached to their, like, idea of atheism. Like, if I'm so, like, I guess, and I guess maybe my question is maybe a better question, hopefully an easier question, is can people have
Okay.
different types of attachments to different things? Like, or, is my attachment to, like, my family going to be the exact same as my attachment to my idea of a
Oh,
god,
great.
or can they vary in different
Great
circumstances?
question. Great question. So there are two. Well, in attachment research generally, there's a debate, how to to how to what degree your attachment representations of people in your life are sort of organized, in hierarchy of relationships or a generalized model. Perhaps that's beyond our scope. Um, when it comes to um, the relationship between spirituality and human relationships, um, my doctoral mentor Per Granqvist wrote about this at length in his book that came out last year on attachment theory and spirituality, on decades of his work, where he proposed uh, correspondence, where if I grow up in a religious environment with uh, positive parenting, right, then I would likely adopt the religious beliefs of my parents, and similar perceive God to be benevolent and loving and caring and all those things. And the same is true, in the negative sense, where if I grow up in a religious setting with abusive parents, then I would likely experience God as similarly, uninterested, at best, malicious, um, but there's also sort of compensation. I mean, what Per Grontrust called it is the compensation pathway, where in the absence of security from human relationships, right, someone who's, is experiencing loneliness would, or worse, abusive relationships would find comfort in God, and there's research about this generally on people's experience converting or switching religions or what have you, all types of religious changes throughout their life based on uh, they're feeling secure and safe within religious environments. Where psychedelics come in a fascinating sense is that you know uh, I don't think we've ever had the ethical and the opportunity with appropriate research ethics and experimental rigor to manipulate spiritual experiences and observe their impact on people, right? Like you can't if you're doing a long-term study of people's spiritual experiences, and can spiritual experiences lead people to healthier psychological lives, right? In healthier relationships. So that would be a really labor-intensive effort and near impossible effort to predict in advance who's going to have these sorts of experiences. Whereas here we can identify what type of people perhaps feel not enough meaning in their lives, or they feel they're high in materialism, or they uh, I mean, yeah, those are two good examples. And through a psychedelic experience, and whether they encounter a god figure or not, whether they have what they later interpret and label as a spiritual religious experience or not, can that revise an attachment model that is so stable over, excuse me, so many years of their life, and that's the work we're sort of uh, uh, proposing, imploring, perhaps people to do, and setting off ourselves in that direction.
Very nice. And I'm excited for that research when it does come about and to hear the results. I had as we come to wrapping up, I had, a thought about like the concrete things like listeners could perhaps take away from this, because it is still theoretical, but it's something to, keep in mind. But I had a couple of thoughts, and one was, specifically
Sure.
talking about, we were talking about the therapeutic alliance. And
Yeah.
it's there seem to be discussions that, sometimes psychedelics can facilitate the therapeutic alliance. That's why something like ketamine assisted psychotherapy might be useful, or, MDMA assisted psychotherapy, right? And like in the case of MDMA specifically, it's, kind of, they say, taking the amygdala, the fear center, offline. And, I don't want to get too much into the neurobiology, but if you wanted to touch on, like, is that something that, insecure attachments, I'm assuming by just almost kind of their name, there is some fear component. And so, is it that even just during that ceremony, um, even whether or not it sticks forever, that a patient, the things that might be contributing, like the neurobiological or, neurophysiological things that might be contributing to attachment styles may be temporarily altered by the substance?
I mean, there's so many different parts of that question to get into, and um, you know, clearly part of how MDMA works is by making you feel more positive about the people around you and more close to the people around you, um, um, and inducing that feeling uh, of closeness, of oneness, of love, in your surroundings. How durable that effect is with, you know, in the absence of thorough therapeutic work, following the session, I think is an open question. I saw there's a debate in the field ongoing about Blue Mondays, right? About the sort of sharp decline in mood after an MDMA session, um, and, and sure, attachment is relevant to the way that people feel safe during an MDMA session, both positively and negatively. Attachment can be uh, hijacked, right? It's not like attachment is a neutral phenomenon. Attachment can be sort of subverted in destructive relationships. But um, sure, by taking the amygdala, uh, absolutely, the effect of MDMA on the brain makes people feel safe and I think we have a responsibility to develop therapeutic frameworks to help people translate those experiences of safety, of love, and all those things into long-lasting therapeutic change.
Got it. Got it. Thank you for that. Okay, and our last 2 minutes, Aaron. Thank you for all that. Can you tell us? We will link your preprint in the notes. Can you tell
Sure,
us where people can find out more about you and your work?
sure. People can find me on Twitter at Aaron Cherniak, AARONCHERNIAK. My DMs are open. I'd love to hear from you if you're interested.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Aaron, and really appreciate you coming on the show.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
And for everybody else out there, until next time. Thanks so much for listening to the Psychedelic Medicine Podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard, please leave a rating or review as it helps others find the show. And if you'd like to learn more, you can find the show notes at plantmedicine.org/podcast, and there's information for clinicians at psychedelicmedicineassociation.org. Our incredible music was by the one and only Porangi. We'll see you next time.